In conversation with him today is Nick Davis, professor at Northwestern University.
Je pourrais conduire cette interview totalement en français, mais je ne parle pas assez bien pour ça. Donc, merci pour ce film. Le reste en anglais. Believe me, I know from recent personal experience what a difficult moment this is for all of us. But since we don't have much time, I am going to ask quickly, but stay in the moment of difficulty. I think in the best of times, getting a movie started, raising the money is a challenge. Given the subject matter, and given who the film's about, did you encounter any kind of climate of resistance to making this? Was it hard to get it going, or was the climate right to tell this story?
Yes, it was not so easy to make a film about such a subject. You know, it's not very bankable to make a film about pedophilia, even in France. So it was, yes, a big deal to convince the producer and the financiers in France. But some people were very touched by this story, which was a big scandal in France. And the film was not very expensive, so we found enough money to make it. But we decided to shoot the film secretly, because it was impossible to shoot in Lyon, saying what was the film about. So we have to lie about the title of the film. It was not called By the Grace of God, but it was called Alexander. And I said to the press, oh, it's a friendship between three men who were very close when they were young, and that's all. So we were totally quiet, and we had the freedom to make what we wanted during the shooting, and we decided to shoot all the interiors of the church in Belgium, because it was impossible to shoot in Lyon, because we would have had to ask to Cardinal Barbarin the permission, so it was impossible.
And I imagine I may be speaking for lots of people in the audience to issue some compliments. As you probably know, Francois wrote the screenplay as well as directing it. And when I thought about the script for this, that it's telling such a huge collective story, but has to be filtered through very particular individual versions of that story, even shifting abruptly that the protagonist we're with for a while is suddenly not the person at the center of the movie, and yet we never lose anybody. And that it has to feel like this process is so painstakingly, frustratingly slow for the characters, but for us, I think this movie moves really quickly. So just as a writing challenge, and maybe later as an editing challenge too, can you talk about how you balanced all those different imperatives?
You know, sometimes reality is stronger than fiction. You know, I didn't have to invent anything, because it happened really like that. You know, it was a kind of relay race between different characters, especially between Alexander and Francois, the two first characters. Alexander first was alone. He began the fight alone, and after a while, when he realized the church would never move, he decided to go to the police, and then there was an investigation. They discovered Francois, and Francois created the association, and then 70 other victims testified. So I had just to follow the real story. After, for me, it was, yes, a big challenge, because usually in a film, after 45 minutes, a character doesn't disappear, except in Psycho of Hitchcock, but it was not this kind of story. So it was the challenge. I didn't know if it would work, if the audience will follow the film and accept the fact one character disappear and after he will be back, but it was the idea to try that. I had not in mind of a film with this kind of construction. I had more in mind some series, you know, sometimes there is each episode on one character.
And I'm going to ask two more questions, then I'm going to turn it over to you all, so think about your questions. Having asked that big picture question about the writing, one thing that I've associated with your movies across your career is that you always seem interested in the complications of people, their contradictions, their weaknesses. And I think this film, you managed to do that even with the characters we're rooting for. Whether it's in such a substantial moment as being so sympathetic during an interview and then seeing a domestic violence incident between that same character moments after. Or I remember my breath catching when Tristan is calling in the middle of the night and saying, I've never told anybody this story, it's so hard. And the wife is saying, put it on speakerphone. And he does it, which seemed like such an infraction. So, and we end with this dinner scene where actually nobody agrees with each other. So can you talk about trying to make these characters complicated and human and flawed, even as they are the sort of noble crusaders in the story?
During the investigation I've made, you know, I met all these people and I realized it was not black and white. Everything was complex. And it was very interesting, and I decided to focus on the families. You know, it's really my subject. You know, I wanted to show that a child abuse is a ticking time bomb, which damage all the family, all the people around. And so I met the parents of each one, of each victim, the children, the brothers, sisters, and it gave me many informations and a very good material for a script. And I had not to invent anything because I discovered so many secrets. For example, Alexander's wife told me it was the first time she told to someone what happened to her. You know, she was abused as a child, and her children didn't know. So I was very moved. You know, she told me that, and I asked her, can I use that for the film? Because I think it's very important to understand why your couple is so strong. You know, why you support so much your man in this fight. And she said, okay, but just change some small things in the story. So I did it. And so each time I met these people, I had so strong moments with them. So I felt very responsible to make them happy of the result of the film.
And then my last question before turning to the audience, if you know Francois' work, and I'm sure many of you do, you know that it's hard to say anything that's true of one film that's true for the others. It's quite eclectic and versatile. If there's one thing I do associate with your movies, it's often been challenging us and pushing the envelope about how desire can work, what it can prompt somebody to do. So for me watching this film, to see someone who's been such a poet of adventurous sexuality and taboo breaking declare a bright line and say, that is not the same as this is wrong, was really powerful, that it was coming from you specifically. But I wonder, does this film feel different to you from your others, or do you feel like you're asking questions that are in the other movies you've made?
It's the first time I make a film about something real, so of course it's different, but at the end it's the same work. The big difference for me was maybe the consequences of the film, because after the release of the film in France, many things happened. You know, the priest was defrocked, and I think it was a little bit because of the film. The cardinal was condemned. Many commissions were created to fight against the pedophilia in the church. So many things changed in France after the film. So, you know, very often the journalist asked the director, do you think cinema can change the world? And everybody said no, except the very pretentious directors. But I have to confess, in the case of this film, it did really change something. So I'm very proud of that, and it was a big surprise. It was not my goal first.